Hi guys, this is D to the MFI for What the Flop, and we're continuing from our last video where basically we introduced a situation where um, it's a heads up no limit hand, it's a 3-bet pot, and the flop is a 7 deuce rainbow. And we're basically looking at both sides, we're looking at both player strategies, but more with a focus on big blind strategy as the potential C better and what range to C bet on the flop. And so in the first video, what we went over was mostly how each player's range interacts with the flop, and what we took away from that was that really, no matter if we use this kind of tighter polarized range or the looser linear range that we also looked at in the first video, either way, the big blind has quite a big equity advantage. As you can see here, it's 61% with this range, and I think it was 64% with the looser linear range. And basically, the reason for that, the main reason for that, is that the button, or the small blind here, misses the flop about almost 2/3 of the time, whereas the big blind only misses the flop about 40% of the time. And the big blind just has, almost twice as many top pairs. He has nearly 2.5 times as many, or no, really 3 times as many middle pair type hands. He just has really more of everything good and less of everything bad. And it doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what big blind strategy should be, because big blind's range isn't necessarily that polarized on the flop. It's just really strong. So it doesn't really tell us whether he should be betting or checking everything, but it certainly does argue for small blind potentially not defending on this flop as often as a kind of traditional game theory type calc might imply. So if we use the calculation they use in mathematics of poker for river situations for this spot, we could say that the big blind is betting 90 into 140, and thus he needs roughly around 39% equity, or sorry, 39% fold equity to bluff the flop. Now that's not really I wouldn't use that too literally, but it's kind of a starting point for looking at these situations. But if we think about it kind of logically here, that means small blind would have to be defending 61% of his range, which means you can see here 66% is high cards, which means roughly 34% is pairs. So if he needs to defend 61% of his range and only 34% of his range is pairs, and say another 3% here is gut shots, so we could say 37% of his range is fairly defendable on the flop, then that still leaves 24% of his range that's just pure high cards that he would theoretically need to defend. But I think what's likely is because of big blind's equity advantage, he, I shouldn't say he, the small blind should basically fold more than what that game theory calc would imply. So how much more, it's really hard to say, and we'll probably get a better feel for that as we go through the analysis. But basically what we're trying to focus on today is what hands make the best floating hands for small blind outside of something that's paired or something that's a gut shot. So if you have read our book What the Float, which kind of covered a out of position floating situation in a single raise pot, there's a few different things that really contribute to the EV of floating, whether positively or negatively. In position, really, there's three main things, and those three things are first, how often you expect to get bet into on the turn. So the more and more you expect to get bet into on the turn, most likely the less and less the EV of floating the flop is going to be. Basically because you don't get the opportunity to get a free card, you don't get the opportunity to pot control when you turn like a middle pair type hand, you don't get the opportunity to bluff when you have air on the turn because he's betting into you. So all those things kind of hurt you. The next thing would be also when the big blind does check, how often he folds to a bet. And obviously That'll be somewhat dependent on the sizing you use on the turn too, but if the big blind bets the turn 50% of the time, and when he checks he folds 80% of the time, then it's quite likely that you can float basically any two on the flop just to be able to bluff the turn when he checks, assuming you have some sort of value on the flop, some sort of hands that you can make on the turn to call again when he does bet. And really lastly, the last thing that's important is what types of hands you turn. So a hand like king queen off, which is probably one of the first hands people would float on this flop, has 6 turns where it makes middle pair. Then it has 4 turns where it makes a gut shot. Or sorry, not 4 turns, 8 turns where it makes a gut shot. And really, other than that, it doesn't really have any turns that continue on. Compare that to a hand that's not really intuitive to float, something like 6-5 of diamonds. 6-5 of diamonds also has 6 outs to make a pair, although it makes a much weaker pair. Then it has 10 outs to make a flush draw, which will definitely allow it to call the turn again, and also gives it, the nuts on 20% of those rivers, the times it turns a flush draw. And then it also has 6 additional cards where it makes an open and straight draw, again giving it the nuts on the river, somewhere between 1/6 and 1/5 of the time. And then it has various cards that make a gut shot as well, which may or may not be callable on turn, although the same thing could be said for the gut shot that king queen makes. So basically what I want to do here is show you guys how to set up a very quick analysis that you can do in just really a few minutes, once you get the hang of it, to very quickly see how much fold equity you have on the turn when he checks, how often you get bet into on the turn, and what type of hands you turn with what quality of equity. So